We're going to have some time for questions or reflections from the audience. But just to start it off, Chloe, I saw you were taking notes during the other presentations. Is there something that stuck out or that you brought from either Suresh or Johanna's presentation that you could share with the room?
Maybe just by going off the back of what Johanna has just shared with us, and to say that I'm very moved by what you've shared, and I think what you said really sort of captures what these dilemmas actually mean for people who are working with those who are affected by these policies. And in the last year, I visited Lesbos. I visited the Polish-Belarusian border, where our staff, our colleagues in the field, are really affected personally by these issues and by these dilemmas, and being confronted face to face with this disjuncture of sort of what could potentially be and what should be in the European context, and the reality on the ground, which I think is extremely hard-hitting for those who are confronted to it for the first time. So I just wanted to say also thank you for putting that into words and for sharing your experience.
Suresh, is there anything you want to share from your...
I think it's... Yes.
It's on.
I think it sort of reminds me of exactly what I started with regarding the people who are working with people in this kind of vulnerable situation. When you present your emotions to me, that presents two fronts. One, it's actually sort of a reflection or a summary of what you have seen. Like in all our presentations, that's what we try to sort of be the voice, although it's actually they should be saying their voice, but it is what it is. And the poem, if I could call that, what you wrote was very sort of touching and sort of paints a picture of what it is. But at the same time, you also present yourself as an individual, but not as an individual, as a tool, as an instrument in that context, and what you can and you cannot do. And like I was saying, to me, if anything to be done in a detention context, it's a staff. We should, people like you, not just healthcare staff, but also other staff who work with. Ideally, these kind of settings should not exist, but it is what it is. So to me, that sort of confirms the picture and the evidence and the hypothesis I have, sort of your experience. That sort of underlines what it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Suresh. Do you want to reflect on that, Johanna? Or?
No, I think it's the way it is, and it's a difficult situation, and you have to kind of try to. When you meet someone on the ground, I think the ethical thing is to try to do. In my case, it is to support with therapeutic work, but it's difficult.
I found it very powerful how you described that you not only try to resolve a situation, but you also try to empower for a future beyond this. And I wanted to dig in a bit in that, because I think it's a very clear choice as well, as Suresh, you described it as that there's negative health consequences is as close to being scientifically proven at this point. Mitigation and try to avoid ending up there is a choice. Now this goes both ways. This puts you also from an ethical perspective in a hard situation. How much should you, in your profession as a psychologist, help out in making the suffering more tolerable?
Yeah, that is of course a really tricky question, and of course it sometimes occurs thoughts of, do I actually make it possible to continue with these policies by trying to put a plaster on the wound? But as I said, I think for me, when you meet the person on the ground, I do think it's the ethical thing to do, to try to get the power back, because this is the base. Otherwise, it's impossible to heal in the future. But yeah, of course, this is a super tricky question.
Thanks for allowing me to ask it. I know it's a tricky one, and it's at the nature, of course, of humanitarian.
Yeah, it is, and
response,
sometimes
yes.
it gets you harder. I think I was caught more by this question when I got home, when I had time to think, when I had time to reflect a bit. But yes, difficult.
Yeah. Thank you. And to move a bit on that same point, but Chloe, you basically presented those policy choices behind the health consequences we see. Now, MSF often gets to hear when we frame it in a critical manner. Okay, so MSF, we do everything wrong. What should we do instead? So where
The solutions.
where's the solutions? How do we do
It's
instead?
a difficult question, but I think to even consider solutions, we need to maybe reconsider the problem that we're trying to solve. And I think this is probably the root cause of what we see today, is that the ways in which we view the people arriving, asking for protection through a securitized lens. And this inherently narrows the scope of possibilities and the scope of solutions that we can offer. And so I think, fundamentally, we can apply mitigation measures potentially in detention, but we've also seen the limits of these mitigation measures, that it's not offering the possibilities to heal what people have experienced. It's not offering the possibilities for them to move forward and have a meaningful future. So I think to even consider solutions today without falling into the narrow trap of sort of an ever sort of downward spiral of quite harmful policies, we need to fundamentally reconsider how we view these individuals who are arriving today. And I think the example of the response of displacement from Ukraine offers an alternative, that something else is possible. We just need to rethink how we view the problem. And then I think from there, a whole new space of solutions can be opened. So unfortunately, I don't have sort of a bullet point checklist of ready-made policy solutions, but I would definitely encourage everyone, policymakers, to fundamentally rethink the problem definition and to re-embed really the question of people's well-being, the right to health, at the center of the debate.
Alternatives, that reminds me of your presentation, Suraj, and your reports. Do you want to comment on that? Have all the solutions been tested sufficiently until now?
No,
No.
maybe none of it. I probably go back to when I was about to do my PhD. I had the option of either working on malaria or had the option to develop a project on detention. And me being naive, I thought it's easy to resolve issues caused by human beings and policies rather than eradicating a bacterial virus. And I was stupid. To be honest, I would say it's much easier to eradicate malaria than creating these kind of policies, what human beings create. And I think I also agree with you, Chloe, on that part. Like, we should look onto the problems, what created these issues, to think about solutions. But at the same time, what is that we're looking at? We discussed the issue of Ukraine, and as a solution, of course, it is a better solution than a lot of Syrians who have faced when they came there to wait for many years. But are the solutions offered to Ukrainians the best solution? And maybe I'm getting too academic here. Like, we often call them as Ukrainian refugees. They're not. Because being a refugee in Sweden means you have certain rights. The ones who have got temporary protection based on the EU directive do not have it. They don't have a personal number. They have the same right to care as an asylum seeker, but we call them refugees. Why are we doing that? Is that to trying to address so it is a solution, but it's a good solution. So I think we probably need to, if Chloe says we need to take it 2 steps back, I would say like maybe 10, 15 steps back. And also look from the bigger perspective. What is this stemming from? What is that we are afraid of? Why we're trying to put people in blocks or preventing them from coming? And then in Sweden, most recently, the talk is all about the violence, lack of integration and everything. Is it because of the mass migration? No, it's not. It's about how we manage things once they're here. So it has nothing to do with the sort of crisis that we happening, if you could call mass migration, and how that is being present and discussed in the media, in the public. I mean, last year, the main group of migrants who came to Sweden was not from Ukraine, not from Syria. It's from India, to work in Volvo, to work in Sandvik and IT companies. But that's not the picture we get when we speak about migration. So this is a bit more of the sociology, but it's actually important that it's the policymakers, it's the public that helps them to decide and gets into power. So to me, it's more of the evidence-informed discussion, not evidence-based. To me, that's a big difference, evidence-based and evidence-informed. The information part, that's missing. Forums like this, where we can sit and discuss, and I am an optimist in that case. I believe that nobody wants to hurt anybody else, but they do make their choices based on various parameters. Understand that and try to speak in a language they would be more receptive to understand. And it's a long process. It's not an immediate solution. So I would say go long back. Why are we starting all those things?
Thank you, Suraj. Very clear. I think we're going to open up for questions from the room a few minutes, and we have microphones for that purpose. Let's see now. So ideally, a question is with a question mark in the end, and it's not so long so you can't understand it. Feel free to direct it at a person or just open, and then we can see who is keen to pick it up. So let's see now. First, get a microphone there.
Thank you. I still have to introduce myself as a migrant, so my question doesn't get interpreted wrongly. A privileged migrant, obviously, but my question is related to what Professor Suraj just said. For me, it seems that the humanitarian argument is not very persuasive, and the decisions is basic because the decisions are mainly driven by the economy, with some exceptions, and that kind of justifies the selective migration policy. So my question is, is there a counter argument for that? Is there an answer to that?
It costs money. So how do we address that? To take in more migrants?
Yeah, having migrants or mass migration have a big burden on the host country.
If you look at the annual report from Migration Board last year, detention cost 862 million Swedish kronor. A detention place per day per person costs around 5,000 Swedish kronor. And when it comes to migration, although it is portrayed as an economic reason, often it's not. For example, in UK, there was a big campaign done by an NGO sort of calculating the cost of detaining people and present the argument, but that had no value because it's more about sovereignty. It's about it's more about sending a message. This is how we will treat the ones who does not have a permit, or this is how we'll treat who are not welcomed here. That's one sort of the argument. And the issue is that we tend to put all migrants in one basket. I think we as humans have a limited ability to think a bit more. We like to put in box. There are around 281 million international migrants. Of that, only 16% are forced migrants. That is asylum seekers, refugees, irregular migrants. Most of them are labor migrants. That everybody likes. They come, they work, they pay tax. More importantly, they send money back home. So it's actually 3 times more than the bilateral aid given by the rich countries to these host countries. And during COVID, there was a big data shown saying that in Sweden, for example, 24% of the essential workforce are people who are migrants, not even migrant origin, that is children of migrants, people who are migrants. Think 1/4 of that workforce is missing. So I wouldn't say it's not necessarily I agree with the first point. Humanitarian argument is not necessarily always finds the right audience in that sense. Often when I get into these meetings, it's often a mix of arguments and sort of trying to understand the audience. Like understanding, why is that the new Theatre of Daulat Israel? Is it because the political parties want it? Yes, partially. But where does it come from? That's where I still believe in the democratic process to some extent. Go back to the public. Where does it come from? Is it still like when we say migrant, is it still the Somali, the Syrian who think, or is it think about a guy like me, originally I'm from India? Is it that the picture comes to mind? Probably not. So that's where it starts, and that's where the argument should come from. And there, economics is one thing, humanitarian is something else, and how they contribute to society and enrich the culture. It's a mix. Sorry, I don't have one argument that helps, but it's a mix, I would say.
Thank you. Anyone else who wants to ask a question?
Let's I've got a microphone here. Thank you. My name is Göran Kolste, and I would just say something as a comment and then a question. Thank you very much for your very interesting presentation, all of you, and you complemented each other very well, I think. Not least, I want to also thank Johanna for her very personal witness, because what I think we need is to see that these are people with in flesh and blood, very similar to ourselves, with the same feelings, with the same fears, and we see that too seldom now in our. There's a new agenda, and I will still remember Alan Kurdi, who this little boy, 2 years old, who was you remember him laying, for example, in this picture. It was like a 2-year guy wherever you can go around and see this alive in Sweden, and he was dead on this in the sea. That was my comment. I think we need this kind of pictures. We need to see them in order to also feel solidarity and see that they, as you said, have bad luck in the natural lottery. We have had good luck in our natural lotteries, and they have that's the basis, I think, for this discussion. I have a question now, and that's a new suggestion coming up, I think, one of these last days, that the detention camps should be outside of Europe instead of inside of Europe. Can you comment on this, please? Thank you.
Do you want to take that one, Chloe?
Yeah,
or?
sure.
Yeah?
And then, Suraj, if you want to compliment as well. Well, there already are detention camps outside of Europe, and in fact, as MSF, we've been present in some of them, in particular in Libya, where a country that has benefited from deals that are supported by the EU, deals with Italy, so that receives money in support of the Libyan Coast Guard to intercept boats at sea and to return them to Libya, where many people are subjected to very harmful forms of detention. I've worked there myself and have met people in detention who quite similarly ask me, oftentimes after having been subjected to physical violence, what crime have I committed to be here? So these detention centers already exist and are extremely costly to rejoin the economic argument, with extremely harmful effects on people. So what's being discussed today, particularly at EU level, is also sort of a reinforcement of these sorts of agreements with third countries. So in one of the regulations that's currently under negotiation, this could potentially be framed as a form of solidarity between EU member states, could be considered the form of agreements that are put in place with non-EU states to contribute to preventing irregular migration. So we've been seeing this for years already, and on a daily basis we see the impact that it has on people. So of course we've been speaking out against it for a long time, and will continue to do so as well as MSF. And then from sort of a more macro detention perspective, I don't know if Suraj has something to complement.
I would suggest that we as Sweden, we as EU should learn from our mistakes. Outsourcing is never a solution. We learned that from Turkey. We know what UK was trying to do with Rwanda, what Denmark tried to do with Rwanda, sending people there, and it's not a solution. And what is the price we are going to pay for that? That's an important question to ask. But I think having outsourcing detention is not a good idea. But on the other hand, we should think like, why are the people taking this journey, coming to Italy or Greece to get into EU? Because they don't have a legal pathway to apply for asylum in their home countries. So instead of trying to outsource detention, maybe open up places where they can come and apply for asylum. EU countries have their embassies. Like Schengen, every country does not have an embassy for Sweden. They go to Denmark, Danish embassy. Something that would prevent these irregular crossings across sea, smuggling, a lot of those kind of things. But that has been a solution presented many years, but never found any. I don't know why, I'm not in the politics, but to me that might be good to have those kind of centers for application, not for detention. Detention anywhere is bad.
Thank you, very clear. We're going to take one last question, and the rest of you who had their hands up can meet the people you want to talk to during the coffee break, which will happen soon. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentations. They were very touching. My question is, what is the role of MSF and other WHO and even the UN to prevent or to provide you have mentioned there are root causes that initiate this migration. So how could you help to prevent armed conflicts, for example? Because we're seeing something that's happening now in Gaza. And I'm just wondering if this could be prevented, then we can prevent migration, for example, people having forced migration. And I see that the NGOs and MSF, they are more healing rather than root cause, trying to stop the root cause from this happening. Thank you.
Good question.
It is a good question. Did you? Yeah. You're right. I mean, our role as MSF is we're primarily a humanitarian medical organization. So we're present in response to specific needs. So oftentimes that means arriving at a time where conflict has erupted or where people's needs already exist. In terms of, I think there is a very strong discourse as well of when it comes to migration in terms of preventing or addressing root causes of migration. And this, I think, is also another sort of form of discourse that merits some consideration, in particular when we're looking at migration routes. So I mentioned that MSF is present all along migration routes, but we're also present in countries of origin and countries which, for example, different countries in Africa along which people stay and might settle. And I think in this context, it's important to really emphasize that most people are not seeking asylum in Europe. Most people are displaced within their countries of origin or in neighboring countries, and we are also present in those environments to provide support and to provide assistance. So although this presentation really focused on the European context, so how do we respond to people's needs once they've arrived in Europe, we're also present across settings where people are, where most people are, in fact, which is not in Europe. So I think that's also an important element of the conversation when it comes to the discussion on root causes.
If I could jump in, you asked $1 million question, how can we prevent conflict? If I knew, I would not be even sitting here. But I think, again, it's going with how we present, like migration is nothing we can prevent and we should not prevent. It's basically humans, it's a coping mechanism, it's of seeking well-being, and that's everybody's basic right in that sense. The problem is that what we see for the past 5-10 years is what's known as mixed migration. So it's a boat that coming across the Mediterranean Sea, say coming to Italy or to Greece, that boat will probably have people who probably would receive or have reasons enough to get refugee status, temporary protection, humanitarian status, or what is loosely called as economic migrants who will most likely get a negative decision. And how do we treat that boat? It's always called smuggling or forced migration. That's also the discourse there. And majority of the people actually, there was this chart from IOM was quite clear showing Greece and Italy are transit countries. But if you look at the nationality of people going through these countries, it's quite different. It was quite clear that, this was in 2016, people coming to Greece are likely to have refugee or forced migration-related reasons, whereas people coming through Italy has a bit more of the economic reasons. And then they might not be necessarily displaced by forced conditions as violence, but because of poor living conditions, job and other kind of things. They come here, they might be in really forceful conditions in camps like Lesbos and other places. So they might be moving from a better off situation to worse off situation in Europe. So the answer to your question, I would say it's the basic classical economic theory, it's development. And I think we as human beings will try not to move as much as we can, because I would say we are kind of lazy in that sense. If we get everything what we need, like the needs you presented, we all know the Maslow's basic hierarchy of needs. If we get that in the place we live, we will not. So it's to support that development in those countries. And if we have the basic means to live, nobody would like to come to a dark place in November and December when it is minus 15 or 14. It's not that it's highly attractive. It is attractive in some sense, but it's at the basic needs that drives. For some, it's the force. Sometimes it's the basic living conditions.
Thank you, Suraj. Anything you want to add to that, or are you good? Thank you. And then I suggest we go into the coffee break. I see some visible signs of caffeine deficiency increasing. So thank you very much to all our panelists. And we stick to our plan of being back here at 10 past. So get ready for that. Thank you.